Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Pascal Chansy, ex-missionary for YWAM. Pascal, it's good to have you on here. I think you are the first guest, maybe, that I've had from YWAM. I've had a few people talking about it and a few people who are loosely connected, but I think you're the first, at least the first missionary for YWAM that we've had on the show, and really good to have you on. I'm very curious to hear more about your story, so maybe if you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. So I'm Pascal Chansy. I am originally from Montreal, from Quebec, so I'm French Canadian. And I mostly grew up in West Africa, in Mali. My dad had a stint in seminary and decided being a pastor was not the way to go. And he decided to do microfinance work and lead projects in agricultural development. So that is where I grew up mostly. But my parents, to the great shock of their family, decided to become Christians. And I grew up in a family where being Christian was taught me that if you are French Canadian, you are white, and you identify as a Protestant or even an evangelical, you are a minority. And even in the context of growing in a predominantly Muslim country, same thing. If you are Christian, you are in a minority. And the form of Christianity that was passed down to me was predominantly the NAR world because of familial connections. And I became a missionary with YWAM, but the only reason to explain how I became a missionary at YWAM is tracing back some of those early childhood connections with the NAR world.
I spent a lot of time in the South in the United States growing up, and you're a minority if you weren't a Christian down in the South. It's changing a little bit now, I think. There's a lot of immigrants, but so it's interesting to hear that you weren't the family connections brought you into the ministry. I'm curious to hear how all of that came about.
When my family moved to Mali, we moved as not missionaries. A lot of the question is like, you grew up in Africa, weren't you missionaries? No, we were we were expats. It was like what we call white immigrants to other countries. We were expats. And we attended an American international school. I have two younger sisters, so that's, going from not speaking any English to speaking fluently in 2 years at this American international school. Very diverse ecosystem, people from all over the world. And really, I took it for granted that was my norm. Like, I have friends who are, Muslim or unchurched, who are from all around the world. And I took that for granted. It's not until I moved to the United States in 2015 that I was like, oh, this is not normal. But because we were introduced to English, it opened up a world that was vastly more Christian, I would say, and a different kind of Christianity that I had grown up with. My formative years are going to Presbyterian churches, multicultural, very respectful of the secular, civic, almost like Quebec is very protective of its separation of church and state. And it's very secular, and it really protects it. And it's almost like if you're a Christian, but you practice kind of that respect, that tolerance for others. It's very much, it's a liberal country that from the 1960s onward definitely democratized, rapidly socialized. I know as the U.S. was experiencing a backlash from conservatives over civil rights, the expansion of civil rights, in Quebec, it was going the opposite. It's like the expansion for everybody. And so my parents, even though they were Christians and, charismatics to boot, they were not reactionaries. And so those values, took up with us when we were exposed to this English Christian world, American Christian world. Really, that's where we began to make connections between the kinds of guest speakers that would come to our churches and what the teachings they would bring. And we wouldn't have, I don't think if I had not been exposed to an English education, I would have had the same foundations in this neo-charismatic world.
Gotcha. And for the listeners who are unfamiliar, when I throw the phrase out YWAM, I'm certain that there are many listeners who have no idea what it was.
No.
It is. Can you describe what is YWAM?
Well, my introduction to Youth with a Mission was through family friends. My parents in Mali became friends with, I would call them the regional directors of this very decentralized, deregulated mission organization. And for me, they were just down-to-earth missionaries doing a really good job connecting different churches together. Their whole thing was unity in the body of Christ through worship.
And it's an acronym, right? YWAM is Youth with a Mission, right?
Yes, Youth with a Mission, founded in 1960 by Loren Cunningham, an American evangelist, who you would say, originally associated with the Assemblies of God. And he was a young college student who went to the Bahamas with a gospel quartet called the Liberators, and where he was told by local communities that, young people have wreaked havoc in their community, dating local girls, and Loren is so distraught about it. He says that is, these young men were culturally insensitive, but they had a great point. Young people are not attached to any institutions. They don't have any commitments back home. What a great idea to send them out into the world to do evangelism. And on the night before, praying before, I guess, a sermon that he was supposed to preach, he had a vision. And in the vision, he says that he saw on the white wall a map moving, and it was very dynamic, and there were waves crashing over continents, and the waves kept receding and then coming back even further in. And he said, as I looked, those waves transformed from just being water to being young people. And they were people like me. He was 21 years old at the time, but they were even younger, and they were going to all over the world preaching the gospel, going into the streets, the bars, and even home to home, and sharing the love of Jesus. And he felt like God had downloaded to him almost a vision of a way to transform missions. Back then, even in the Assemblies of God, you had to be submit under the hierarchy of authority. You had to be trained, and you had to fundraise in a specific way, like be sent out. And he felt like it was limiting the spread of the gospel and even the young people's ability to do missions. So that's how that's the vision. But I think the story of how he says this came from God is because he had a formative background in the Assemblies of God with parents who were itinerant preachers who had taught him how to discern the voice of God in everything from, finances to where the ministry's headed.
Yeah, there were a lot of ministries that had youth programs. Billy Graham had, I think it was called Youth for Christ, and there were a lot of copycats that were created. I think Jim Jones even had some sort of a youth program. Jones actually began his ministry as a youth minister. So it paints these weird pictures. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. Youth with a Mission, YWAM. What, if you could guess, what was their target age for the children that were in it?
Well, I will answer in two parts. One is young people outside of, like, that come out of high school, basically. So 18 to 25-year-olds, really. Which is sometimes a time for kids who are looking what to do. They're very passionate. I remember myself over 15 years ago being very, like, having lots of energy, wanting to belong to something bigger than yourself. And I think they tap into that desire that teenagers have of having some sort of impact. But early on, Youth with a Mission also saw the need to target even younger people. And with children ministries, preschool education, and like kids camps, which is where, with the people in Mali, that's how I got interested in doing Youth with a Mission, is because I wanted to work with children. Actually, I had been prophesied in African instituted Pentecostal churches that I would become a missionary and work with children. So I knew of all of the programs that YWAM offered in that area and was like, oh, that's for me.
Yeah, that's, and not everybody who are in these youth programs, even the youth programs, not all of them are bad. The cult that we escaped, they had a youth program, and they've got a camp here locally. I call it a children's indoctrination camp. But the people who run the camp, the people who are just rank and file members in the cult, they have no idea that they're indoctrinating children. They're doing a good thing, so they feel like it's good. With the YWAM programs, once you were in it and you were working with the children, I'm certain that you felt you were doing a good thing. After you realized what YWAM was, would you reflect on your years doing this as helping the children, truly helping them, or was it indoctrination and helping them?
Oh, the latter, both, I would say, yes. But I mean, that's, if we go even further into the kind of things that we were teaching the children, I think we could connect the dots with a lot more of the foundational teachings that are, key to the NAR world. And I think some of them messed me up personally, but I know if you teach them at a 4-year-old, my child is 4-year-old. When I was teaching a 4-year-old how to be a joyful, obedient servant of God, how to listen, be attentive to God's voice, that developed a kind of hypervigilance that can mess up a child's inner sense of, like, what is true, what's real, and even their ability to be critical thinkers, as you always like to talk about. And it also messes up the nervous system. You just always on edge.
Yeah. I'm always looking at the critical side. I know there's two sides of things, but I usually focus on the critical because it's exploring what we weren't allowed to whenever I was in it. But it seems to me that a lot of the programs like this, and in the NAR in general, they're targeting the youth because if they can get them to disable critical thinking before the age when critical thinking hits them the hardest, they can stay in it. And I grew up. I grew up. It was totally different than the NAR, but there's so many similarities. One of the doctrines we had was and it's so wrong. I feel stupid saying this, but we had this doctrine that we were taught that the shepherd liked to break the sheep so that the sheep didn't get out of the fold, break the legs of the sheep. And
I've heard that.
Yeah, we were told this is a good thing, right? Well, no shepherd's going to do this, man. You can kill a sheep like this. That's not what a shepherd does. A shepherd tends to the flock, doesn't injure and maim the sheep. But we were taught this, but what that does to the psyche of a child is it makes them, they don't want their leg broken. They don't want to step out of line because their leg might get broken, right? So I'm assuming you had something very similar in YWAM.
I mean, I wasn't, before YWAM too, I was an eager to please child who's one of my parents, I would say, was almost addicted to the spiritual highs that they would find in religious conferences and in the church of their sister. And that sister, my aunt, was involved in a church in suburb of Montreal that is connected to Bill Hammond's Christian International Network, and also a different network in Canada called Watchmen for the Nations. And it's, I just listened to your episode today with Charles on deliverance and healings, and that brought me back to some of the extended church. I mean, church could go on for 4 hours in those settings, where, God's bringing healing to the congregation. This is a small mom and pop church that has never grown since the 1990s when it was founded. And from its inception, it's just been a handful of families who had people having more children and intermarrying. Really, it's just really weird. But they had the kind of dynamic worship that my parent really looked for, and the teachings that were not just here's 3 ways to better your family. It was more like how to grow your relationship with God, how to and here I'm going to bring in some connections to the latter rain, but like how to walk in your own destiny, like manifest God's presence here on earth, how to be the kingdom, how to I would say the manifest destiny of God, like manifest God of sons of God, basically. Of like, if you are not aligning yourself with a positional authority, I guess God's authority as God's child, then you are not truly representing God on earth. You're missing out on the best. And God wants you to walk in a room like a king and a queen, and have such authority and such understanding of who you are that you can ask for anything and it will be granted to you. So there were members of that church who had crazy testimonies of asking for favors with local authorities for stages for their ministries and being granted, or getting jobs that were beyond their what they were trained for or what they could do, and getting it. And it's just like these people really did think that once you understood who you are in Christ, then anything was open for you.
Yeah, Charles and I had a lot of fun doing the deliverance ministers, looking through the deliverance ministers training manual. Growing up in a family where it was my grandfather that was the pastor, but I've spoken with many people who've escaped and some of them who've dechurched, who their parent was a pastor, and you get a different perspective, because whenever it's brought before the people as some spiritual event, there's usually a cause and effect, and the way that the minister brings it to the pulpit is they'll tell you the effect, but they withhold the cause. And the children of the pastor or the grandchildren often know the cause that brought the result, right? But to the people, this is spiritual. This is God is moving among us. And you don't, I'm not saying that God never moves among the people, but sometimes if you do something that you're expecting a result, it's very easy to claim some supernatural thing, and even prophecy, if you know that you caused something that will produce a result.
Yeah, I would say that church had produced its own original music, but to go alongside that, they developed a dance ministry. So a dance team that was trained as rigorously as a professional dance troupe. And they traveled all over the world with especially Watchmen for the Nations, that network, leading conferences in worship. But whenever they would train, and I had friends, over the summer, built relationships, people my age who were part of the dance troupe, who would say, hey, after, we hang out, I got to go train. And they would go and they would be like 1 hour, 2 hours, like on the, exercising on the dance floor. But following that, there was always ministry time, where somebody, sometimes it was the head pastor, and she's quite something, quite the order, and she knows how to get the results she wants. Or sometimes it was another member of the church, and what they would do is, either group therapy is what I call it, or where they just confess everything in front of each, and it's like trauma bonding, or they would do some like meditative exercises and like soak in the spirit, and whatever happened out of those things, the head teacher, pastor, would then on Sunday say ask the congregation if they wanted the same kind of growth, healing, whatever blessing God brought to the dance team. And that's basically what church was like. It's like whatever happened in the dance team, which, was a lot of deliverance and healing ministries, stuff like that. Well, that's what the church experienced on Sunday.
So it was like the pre-planning of the ministry.
Basically. And I've thought about it. You talked about, the power of fasting or the power of worship to control minds. But I have to say, when you're like spent because you worked out your body physically so much, you are vulnerable. And I think my friends were vulnerable to spiritual manipulation.
So I've studied the works of many different cult experts, and whenever a cult can take a person and drive them into exhaustion, it drives them into a mental state where the mind goes into survival mode. Much like the fasting. Whenever you fast over a period of time, there comes a point in which your body goes into survival mode. And when it does, there's this, in your psyche, you become like you're looking for a parent-child type relationship, because the mother, the father, they nurture the children. And so if the spiritual leader can step in as this mother figure or father figure, then your body will automatically recognize this and connect to it, and they can wreak havoc with your heads once they get into that state. So there are many different, I think the last one I read, it might have been Combating Cult Mind Control, but I think the last one I read was talking about how they would deprive the members of sleep because they would do the chanting and the exercise, and sometimes late at night. They would go until all hours of the night to just literally exhaust the people.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was familiar with that. Even in the kind of Pentecostal churches we used to go in Mali, meetings, all night prayer meetings were a common thing. And I actually acknowledge now that I was exhausted physically when I joined YWAM. I physically, mentally, in a weird period of transition in my life, leaving high school, was a bubble in itself. I, funny enough, went to a prestigious boarding school in Massachusetts, elite, liberal arts school, because when I hit 15 in the school that I was in Mali, there were no more friends, and it felt like academically I was stunted. So my dad's company provided for a really great education that should have safeguarded me from the kind of experience, in entering cults afterward. And it kind of did. It provided a ballast, but I was still so determined to join YWAM that when I was 18 years old, I was like, all my friends are headed to Ivy League school, and I'm going to Hawaii and to become a missionary.
Wow.
And
what did your parents?
There were.
What did your parents say when you told them that?
Let's say it caused a friction with my father, who really wanted me to go to school. And nowadays he was wise in that decision. But they were none the wiser because of their friendship with the regional directors of YWAM in Mali. And YWAM produced great music that was so valuable to a lot of Francophone churches. And I mean, we grew up with the recordings, all that. It was just like, of course, go do that. I mean, you've always wanted to since you were 12 years old. Get it out of your system, kind of a thing. And so yeah, but I was at a place in my life where I was not healthy physically. And so I was primed when I joined YWAM. Their entry school, they call it because obviously you don't just become a missionary, you have to have some sort of training. And everybody who wants to join Youth with Mission has to go through what they call the discipleship training school, which is a 6-month formation. I guess it's like 3 months of lecture phases where you get once every week a different topic brought by a different speaker, and then followed by 3 months of outreach, what they call it. So you do evangelism. And when I joined to do my discipleship training school, I was already vulnerable to being indoctrinated.
The groups that descended from the latter rain movement, they learned by example. If the people are weak in any way, whether it's mentally or physically, they're more susceptible to joining a cult, and they don't critically think because they're in that state where they're looking for something. And if their focus is on natural physical healing or just to better themselves, they're more susceptible to joining the cults. So that's very common among the groups. So you left the prestigious college life to go to Hawaii to become a missionary, and what was that like? I've heard of missionaries going overseas, but I've never really heard of any going to Hawaii.
Well, so in the story of YWAM, in the first 10 years of, from 1960 to 1970, Loren was just taking teams of anybody who, he was recruiting people. Actually, this is interesting. I found a advertisement for, I know on your website you bought a bunch of like advertisement or in the early days of YWAM. Loren's like anybody trying to recruit anyone. Well, in the Angelus magazine, I think it's a 1959 edition, there is I guess an advertisement in there for a meeting where Loren was going to be the speaker, and his thing was going to be like recruiting people for missions. So speaking, but also like trying to get people afterwards to like sign me up to go and do your thing. And then actually in the same page, there's a William Branham and David Duplessis, I don't know how to say his name, meeting advertisement as well. So this is, wow. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, I think I should send you the link. This is fun.
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
But for the first for the first 10 years, it was kind of random, and then slowly as he was gaining more people who were more interested, he decided that they needed more formal training, and he thought that God gave him a vision of a school in Switzerland. And that was confirmed by different people. They all said, "Oh yeah, God told me, go and start this school." And the biggest one was a man. I think his name is Willard Cantillon. He was a Canadian evangelist who kind of ran at the same time as William Branham, had similar, connections. And who told him, yeah, God said, you need to go to Switzerland, start a school over there to train missionaries, and here I will give you an address and a phone number of a person who you can connect with. And so Loren Cunningham and his wife Doreen, who's the co-founder of YWAM, they took a one-way trip to Switzerland, started the school there. And then over the years, it grew, and they just kind of passed off the school to someone else, and then they went to Hawaii. Loren had already been to Hawaii before to do evangelism, and they just felt led by God, to go there. And I think sometime in the mid to late 70s, they bought a hotel that they remodeled, and it became what is now the University of the Nations. First, it was called the Pacific Asia University or something like that, and then they renamed it. They brought a man from a university in Chicago, and I can't remember if it was which name of it, but he was his area of studies was like chemistry or something, Howard Malmstad, and they asked him to design a kind of a global university that would train missionaries in modular format. And so basically that's where I went to. It's a huge campus. At the time in 2010, there were almost 1,000 people on campus. And they had many discipleship training schools, but somehow I had been told that I should do one in particular, which is called Fire and Fragrance. And at the time, it was kind of a brand new program that was led by its founders then, Andy Bird, and her name is Amy Ward. I think she was named Amy Solers before she got married. And it was kind of like IHOP. Let's just say IHOP Casey.
Wow.
Yes, very much. It is because of the leaders, Andy Bird and Amy Solers' connections to ministries like IHOP, Bethel, School of Supernatural Ministries, and Morning Stars. It was ran very much like the love child of IHOP Casey and Bethel.
Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the new Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. They see one structure like this that's working and generating a lot of revenue. Well, let's copy that and let's do it elsewhere. And I have to say, if you have somewhere to pick to do it, Hawaii is not a bad place.
No, and I had not originally wanted to do it in Hawaii. I even asked our friends in Mali. I was like, "Hey, I know you have schools here in Mali. Why can't I do it there?" And I thought about doing one in Costa Rica because I had friends in Costa Rica, and it all fell through. And everyone that I kept asking was like, "No, this one in Hawaii." So I landed there, and it was intense, let's just say, but it was familiar at the same time. The similar kinetic, expressive worship, emphasis on prayer as the catalyst for missions that I'd heard of my whole life. But it really had the similar teachings as was being taught in IHOP Casey. I think the reason why Fire and Fragrance really started was there was a revival at IHOP in 2008. I think 2008, 2009, the student revival. And I think it had such a trickle-down effect in the charismatic world that, at some point there were people who were like, we need to do the similar thing. We need to have a prayer room on the campus here in Kona, Hawaii. And we need to, be praying for the great next awakening that, and people need to be so emotionally prepared for that and willing to commit their whole lives to living missionally in the most spiritually dark places on earth. And where we're going to do it, we're going to do it in a prayer room where you're just constantly bombarded with either it's so serene that you want to fall asleep, and then you are having weird visions and dreams, and it's just you're primed for manipulation.
Yeah.
Or you're hearing these messages that are of warfare, of you need the faith of nations depends on you praying for them and binding up spirits and all sorts of things like that.
Basically, what you're describing is brainwashing, and I've seen several sci-fi movies where they do the same thing with children, which is sad and scary all at the same time. But, that's really, for me, that's one of the most horrific things about the NAR. It's not so much that the churches are bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not that the churches themselves have enough pull to make it such a mess, but the NAR network. You create an IHOP, and then it's networked with all these other churches and these other movements, and then they pick up the ideas, and, oh, well, it works if they're brainwashing people here, let's brainwash people in this other place too, and maybe we can make money. And, the bottom line, it's always about money, and it's always about control, and unfortunately, it's often about sex as well. But the way these networks allow each other to spread ideas is the most destructive thing, because what it's essentially doing is rewriting the DNA of Christianity.
I agree. And for the longest time, since over the last decade, I've been questioning how we have arrived in this milieu now, the merging of politics with, the charismatic world, all of that. And I've always said that it's because of the relationships, and those worlds is all networks. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. It's just nebulous networks of relationship, and association is currency in that world. Who you know, who you promote. I mean, that's how they get their gigs. Andy Bird has spoken multiple times at IHOP. Very good friends with Mike Bickle. In preparation for our outreach, I'll talk to you about the outreach in a bit because I think it's interesting. We studied Mike Bickle's, the way that he breaks up a day in 15-minute chunks. And we're like, here's how we're going to break up our day into 15-minute chunks to be very productive. And not just productive, but also accountable to the Lord. So, yeah, Eddie is connected to so many different worlds. I mean, he's part of now Empower 21, which is a NAR network of leaders with Cindy Jacobs on it. But there's a lot more of leaders. It's so global now that I even heard leaders from the French-speaking world. There's a guy, Michel Wadogo, is a famous West African pastor in that world. There's a guy, Jean-Luc Trachel, who's a Swiss megachurch pastor with a healing ministry. And they're all connected, and they're all promoting each other's work. Andy Bird has worked really closely with Francis Chan, with Sean Foyt, with Lou Engle, and now his biggest project now is the Send. And it is it's global. I mean, Send has started in Orlando a few years ago and has now gone to Brazil. It's going to be in New Zealand, the Philippines, Argentina, the UK, and the idea is to take Loren's idea of young people going to missions, and it's just even less regulated, less don't even come to YWAM, just go out in your own community. It's they're just bringing people in these stadiums, and they pump them with worship and these messages about committing one's life for the mission, seeing the generation transformed. I mean, you're really targeting Gen Z now with very cutting edge technologies, and the idea is that they're bringing God's kingdom on earth, or taking dominion over all spheres of life, basically.
Yeah, it's all those connections really that is the power behind this thing. And people, I don't know if you've seen the comments, but people often comment, you can't do this. This is guilt by association. Just because this one man is falling into error and he's working with this other man, you can't link the two. But in the NAR, it's different. That's actually how this works. Because they're connected and because they're, I don't know what you call it, they're cross-pollinating. They're cross-pollinating each other's congregations. And so this thing just kind of builds up as this big empire that's all interconnected. But you talked about outreach. Tell us a little bit more about the outreach programs.
So following 12-week of lectures in Hawaii, I then joined a group of, I think we were 12 of us. We went to East Coast of the U.S. The idea was that we were going to be connecting with houses of prayers and campus ministries to kind of pave the way for a potential YWAM base in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That launching another fine fragrance school basically there. But to do that, you have to have the kind of the network of teachers and recruiting that would lead to that. And so that is what we did. We went to Yale University, asking God to launch out the next wave of student volunteer movement, which to me was, I had grown up fascinated by it and went to a boarding school where that was where it was started, basically. I went to D.L. Moody's, Northfield Mount Hermon School. So I was like, this is so exciting. I'm part of history. And that's how they teach you. They're like, you're part of like something bigger than you. Like you're creating history, making history this way. But we eventually made our way down through Pennsylvania and landed in DC. And we stayed in DC for a whole month, and I have no recollection of us doing any sort of evangelism, any working with churches. But the only thing we did was prayer ministry. We stayed in like $1 million house on 3rd Street Southeast, I think. That's like right kitty corner to where C Street is, that house.
Wow.
Right behind. Yes, it is. The house was there for traveling teams of intercessors, I think.
And that's significant for the people who aren't aware what C Street is. I'll let you tell it.
Oh, yeah. C Street is the 12 like room build, like I don't know, you can erase that part. It's like I'll start it again. It's like C Street is the house that is belongs to the family, which is a very controversial group that brings in politicians and staffers for Bible studies, but was really in the limelight with like a documentary about it, and then some scandals. Yes.
And recently, somebody just sent me in via email. I've got some CIA documents where the CIA is also connected to the family, so it's getting pretty deep.
Yes, and YWAM apparently used to own that building. I don't know that story yet. I'm so curious. I'm gonna have to go look and dig into this one.
Yeah, I saw that. It's one of the news articles mentioned that. It's crazy stuff because you get people, they're bringing people, and it's under the auspices of this Christian thing, but people that you don't associate with Christianity are coming in here and they're mingling with each other, and you can't just really point a finger on it without solid evidence. But when you see somebody like, I don't know, Michael Jackson coming in with these guys, and yes, it's okay, he's the king of pop, but then the next person they bring is Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton gets involved with this thing, and well, what are they talking about? She's not, at least I don't picture her as being very interested in NAR religion.
No, I mean, and a lot of the politicians who've who've been involved are not as famous as she is. But they still have a oversized influence on Capitol Hill. Our host was a man by the name of Jason. I'm going to name him. His name was Jason Hershey, and he's the founder of DC, David's Tent, DC. I think David's Tent was a prayer worship movement that came out of the UK. But he also started YWAM DC. And the guy was connected with another man on Capitol Hill named Dick Simmons. Dick Simmons, who Man for All Nations. I can't remember exactly the name of the ministry. I'll send you the link, but his goal was to get men to pray every morning for the nation, lest God judge the U.S. for like the sins of abortion, the great family values not being a thing anymore, and I don't know, on and on and on. Yeah. So Dick Simmons is a very well-connected intercessor who has an apartment, or had an apartment building right behind the Supreme Court, and there's a prayer room there that we would do ministry in. So Jason Hershey would bring us in that building, meet it with Dick Simmons, and then we would pray for the revival of America. And Jason Hershey would also take us on tours of all the monuments. And then we would do prayer walks and spiritual warfare. And I think one of the things that stood up to me for that time was we went to an event that was led by Lou Engle, but I don't think it was the call, because I've looked up and there was no the call on the Washington Mall that year. But it was similar. I mean, I think Michelle Bachmann spoke. I'm pretty sure Sean Feucht was there before he became infamous. And but the whole thing that stood out to me is like, all of my peers here who are American really do believe that if they don't pray, this country is going to hell in the handbasket. And as a Canadian, it was just felt very strange. Even as I was like the outsider. I'm like, this is like, I was starting to seeing the marriage of, conservative, a specific type of conservative politics with religion that I was not used to priorly.
Yeah. And to be clear, it's not bad really to pray, and what they're saying is fine. I have no problem with that. The problem is that they're influencing very powerful people outside of the public vote, and in doing so, maybe they're influencing them good. I don't know. I can't say that they're not, but we have no control over it because we're not voting, and that's the real problem here. That's not something that should be happening.
Yeah. No, but it's the kind of theology and the ideology of gaining dominion, not through democratic ways, but it's, NAR has been described. I think I wrote it down because this was, I thought it was really good. It's somebody from the Southern Poverty Law Center described, NAR being, it's not a political Christian movement. It's more like authoritarian, anti-democratic movement within religion. And it's like, because of the way that they perceive the world, in such a Manichaean way, where it's like light versus dark, evil, like Satan's realm. We got to push it back, as people of prayer. It's like anything that does not agree with their policies and their favorite politicians is demonized. And even I could see it back then in 2010. It's like it was beginning to form. And but like I said, I was impressionable. I was young and willing to do everything, even stand in front of the Supreme Court with a piece of tape over my mouth that said life.
Wow. So you were fully bought into this. How in the world did you escape it?
Slowly. After doing the discipleship training course, even though I wanted to join the pioneering of the YWAM Harrisburg base, I was unwell physically and I need to go home. So for about a year, I just kind of regained my strengths, sort of deprogram myself a bit, even though I really still wanted to be part of YWAM. When I rejoined, it was more through the becoming a preschool teacher. So they have a whole arm of training educators. And I went to Switzerland, to the original base in Lausanne in Switzerland, and did my training there mostly. I went back to Hawaii for a bit, worked at a preschool there under Loren Cunningham's daughter, Karen Cunningham, who was my supervisor. And but then mostly was either a preschool teacher with a preschool associated with the YWAM base, or was on staff, mostly helping out with operations there. And I loved the Lausanne base. It was a really good community. It was smaller, less than 100 people, very multicultural. But there were still some red flags as I look back over the years. Some of the stuff that was taught to us, heavy emphasis on worldview, on demonizing the impact of the Enlightenment and humanism, especially in Europe. And in the world of education, as colleagues and I were trying to encourage people to develop Christian schools, there was a lot of imported ideas about homeschooling, Christian school from the US. So a lot of the reasons for Christian schooling were being imported into Europe. And the short story is things did not work out well for that preschool financially, and also laws changed in Switzerland where 4-year-olds now had to go to preschool, basically, state-sponsored preschools. And so we shut down, and at the same time I met my current partner, who was already a staff member with a different YWAM base in Montana. And so I moved to Montana in 2015, and it was a different experience altogether. I moved from a community that knew me well, to a place where I was a stranger. And I just mostly worked doing operations work, running a hospitality ministry, so guest house for people coming to visit. And we both grew disillusioned. But kind of the promises that we had brought us into YWAM, by then we were 25, 27. It just all fell apart. I wasn't able to get my full degree with the University of Nations, which is their unaccredited agency of training YWAMers globally. And I was like, I need to get a proper education. And we left when we got married. We didn't have any money. So, we could barely afford rent for a studio. And so, we both got jobs. I got a job at a local Assemblies of God church, so we were already members of. And my husband worked doing some AV stuff.
Wow, that must have been a very difficult journey. If you could give advice to people who are still in YWAM, what advice would you give them?
Oh my gosh, that is a very good question. What I would say, for those who are still in, we're trained to be discerning with all these, I guess, techniques and sciences of how, intercession and how to hear God's voice for one's own life. But I think the biggest thing is to not shut out outside voices of those who are not part of YWAM. YWAM is a bubble, and because of that, it insulates you, and it's a controlling environment that, if you are not careful, can suck you in and steal a decade of your life, like it did almost for me. And your youthful, passionate energies could have been spent setting up your life for career, or even grounding yourself in one community, and instead they're spent to this mission organization that says they care about you, but they really don't. Once you're out, and they never reach out again. And it's well, what are you wanting for your whole life? It's I think relationships are keys. Relationships with family who is not part of YWAM, and also expanding your vision beyond the world of YWAM and beyond the world of charismatic Christianity. Exposing yourself to ideas that you might be wrong and that you need to change. And a little bit of cognitive dissonance is capable of bringing some light in what can feel like a very stuffy environment.
Yeah, that's very good advice. You mentioned what happens after you leave and how they disconnect from you. It was just yesterday I was recording a podcast with a person that I asked them, was it a cult? And I can't remember how the conversation came to be, but he said basically the easiest way to tell a cult is how they react when you leave them. If they react, they love you, they would welcome you back, they wish you well on your way, they're probably a healthy group. But if they cut you off, never to be heard from again, and a lot of times they'll demonize you after you leave. It's usually a cult if they do that. So, yeah. But anyway, I'm very glad that you joined us to tell your story of YWAM. I'm still so curious. There's so much more I want to know, especially when I found the C Street thing and then some of the other things that people have sent me about it. I'm sitting here scratching my head and I'm thinking, I don't even know what to say. It looks like a religion on the surface, but some of the things that they're connected to is very much not religious. So what is this? How do you describe this thing? And
Yeah.
I'm
And look,
curious.
I'm interested. To me, it's the story of how the Seven Mountain Mandate transformed. It has its roots in YWAM.
Yes.
But I mean, even before, I mean, the connections came through YWAM and now have diverted back outside of it. And it's so key to, I guess, what we're seeing from neo-charismatic world now with Dominion theology. But it is now not just in the U.S., but it is global. I mean, look in Latin America, South America, and Australia, New Zealand. I mean, there is a lot of, it is, what ideas have repercussions. And I love this idea that I've heard from someone else say, bad theology kills. And it does, and
Yeah.
not right, but it has some really harmful impact.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you did this, and I'm sure that the listeners are going to be very eager to hear more. So now you've given me work because they're going to ask me, please dig deeper into YWAM. This is some
Yes.
crazy stuff. So
YWAM is so underreported, understudied, and often when people bring it up, it's because it's so deregulated, decentralized. I mean, it's like in 180 countries, and it's like over 18,000 staff members. So it's like everyone says, "Oh, I've had a great experience in YWAM," but there are people who say, "No, I experienced abuse. This was bad." So you hear a lot of things, but as soon as you want to look into YWAM, it's hard to bring it all into a cohesive whole because of the way that it was intentionally structured or destructured.
Which fascinates me all the more. But anyway, thank you for doing this. If you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the NAR, you can read Weaponized Religion, From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and soon Audible.